Welcome, everybody, to the Autism Now What podcast. Today, I have the privilege of speaking to Dr. Shelley Margot. She's actually an occupational therapist and an ex-South African. And in fact, Shelley is a lot more. Shelley, welcome. And I just want to take a few moments reading your biography for the professionals and the parents listening today. So Dr. Margot is the owner of Academy ABA. Very interesting. An occupational therapist is the owner of an ABA academy. And I like the smile. We're going to be talking about occupational therapy and ABA today. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in occupational therapy at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, and received her post-professional master's degree from Sargent College at Boston University. She has certifications in sensory integration and praxis test, Samonis sound therapy, sensory learning program, fast forward, and integrated learning systems. I was actually really excited to see about the fast forward. That's a program that we've used before at the Star Academy, and we'll chat more about that. In 1998, Shelley opened Children's Therapy Works, an industry leader in America, providing intensive multidisciplinary therapeutic programming for children with varying neurological disabilities resulting in difficulty functioning at home, at school, or within their community. Their services included occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, and utilizing a multidisciplinary approach, sensory integration, and neurodevelopmental tools specific to each individual and family. The philosophy of the clinic focused on using intensive neurological treatment to facilitate brain plasticity, thereby improving daily living skills. Shelley, when I'm listening to your background, if this was my child, I would want you to be on my team. That's all I can say. And I'm not even halfway through your biography. In 2010, Dr. Margot started a pilot school to meet the needs of children with dyspraxia, learning disabilities, autism, and more. Now named the Academy at North Fulton, she accredited nonprofit school provided innovative, integrated, and top quality therapeutic services for grades K to 12, addressing and facilitating the child's most effective way of learning and helping establish the confidence they need to progress in an academic setting. You can hear Dr. Margot is solutions orientated. That's what we need. Shelley has developed training programs for occupational, speech, and physical therapists and published articles for Georgia Occupational Therapy Association, American Occupational Therapy Association, local magazines, and online media. You do this at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah.
He has lectured therapists, teachers, and parents on integrating sensory integration and oral motor techniques, so important in a treatment protocol. She has also presented at the National Down Syndrome Congress and at the Autism Avenue 2013 Regional Possibilities and Potential Autism Asperger's Conference. She was recently featured as a she-ro in the North Fulton Women's Magazine and again in their January edition. This lady from South Africa smashed it in America.
Little South African.
Yeah, wow, these are just amazing achievements. In August 24, Dr. Margot published her first book, Is This My Child? Sensory Integration Simplified. She received her doctorate from Sargent College, Boston University, doctoral program for occupational therapy in 2017. This does not end. In 2016, her partner and husband, Andy, added applied behavior analysis to the multidisciplinary team and Academy ABA was born. Recognizing the struggles and disconnects that were causing tensions in the clinics between the therapists, Shelley went back to school to get a postgraduate certificate in applied behavior analysis. Shelley, you are my hero. You are my hero. As a behavioral therapist with 9 years in the ABA space and 30 years in pediatric occupational therapy. Wow. Her work focuses on empowering children to overcome sensory, behavioral, and communication challenges. Currently a board-certified behavior analyst certification, she integrates applied behavior analysis into therapeutic strategies to create impactful solutions. Now, we're going to talk about this because in South Africa, occupational therapists are very in the dark when it comes to applied behavior analysis. At Academy ABA, she contributes to advancing care by aligning education and therapy with the latest developments in approach, emphasizes collaboration with families and professionals to achieve meaningful outcomes for children navigating complex developmental needs. Wow, Shelley, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to record this podcast. It's an honor and a privilege to be speaking to you today. And I'm going to jump straight in and ask you, what prompted you all those years ago to study occupational therapy in South Africa?
Well, firstly, thank you. It's always exciting to come home. So I always loved working with people with disabilities. From the time I was 6 years old, Selwyn Siegel in Johannesburg, I was always involved in those kinds of programs. And a dear friend of mine who was in medical school said you'd be a great occupational therapist because it combines creativity with function. So I knew I didn't want to be a medical doctor. It was too technical for me. I wanted to work with people with function. And when I was 14 years old, I started observing at Joburg Gen. Back then, it was the Johannesburg General Hospital, volunteering at a bunch of places, and OT just felt right. It combined all the pieces, as I say, of creativity, neurological therapies, but it had the science behind it too. And it just was a natural progression for me. Yeah.
Amazing. And it's just so nice to be speaking to you. You know, you've been living in America for so many years, but you're a Wits graduate. So that's where this all started many years ago. Now tell us a little bit more about your master's degree from Boston University.
So, in the States, the science is very important. If you're going to progress as a professional, you have to understand where the research was. And it was a development path. So Boston University is considered the #1 university for occupational therapy in the world. You've got all your top researchers and professors there. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity. Little me from South Africa gets to go to Boston. The master's it taught me how to read research. And again, having access to the top SI people in the world was just incredible. And then they invited me to do my doctoral program. And that was the opportunity for me to actually research what I was doing and publish what I was doing. And that's when I was able to publish which it's out there. It's an academic paper, an academic doctoral project on an integrated therapeutic approach on how all these things come together. So how do we look at it? How do we look at the person? How do we measure all of this? And so, 3 kids and a business, and you go off to do your doctorate. What can I say? I'm an forever student.
I can see that. The kids must have been very proud of their mom when she got that doctorate. I mean, that's a massive achievement.
Yeah, hopefully, well, they're now all in school, so I guess it helped them figure out their path. Yeah.
Amazing. Now, in 2014, you wrote and published the book, Is This My Child? Sensory Integration Simplified. Why is sensory integration so important to a child's learning?
So sensory integration is they form the building blocks of development and learning. And it happens very, very deep in the brain, and it starts in utero. So you have to understand how all these blocks come together so that learning can occur. And it enables us to understand why kids or people are functioning the way they are functioning neurologically. So the beauty about sensory integration and what we know from the research is we can actually see in the brain using QEEG studies where are the pathways going. And so when you look at sensory processing and the 3 components that are involved, without that, we can't then build the building blocks for higher level cognitive and emotional skills. And everything connects together. So these tactile, vestibular, so movement, touch, and deep pressure tell us where our bodies are in space, tell us how we have to move, tell us whether something's hot or cold. Can we touch it? Can we wear our clothes? So those fundamental building blocks, when they're aligned, we see developmental progress. When they're not aligned, we see dysfunction. And that's why understanding why these kids, or even human beings, we all have our little idiosyncrasies, but the way we look at it is sensory integration, evaluation, and treatment teaches us why the person's doing what they're doing. And then we can put a treatment plan together for them. And we have to look at it within the realm of what's normal. A lot of the time we look at these kids and go, oh, that's not normal. Well, we're not expecting 2 and 3-year-olds to do X, Y, and Z. And if we can test and understand that sensory processing piece, then we can measure that against their peers, against themselves, and see whether they have those functioning building blocks. We could do a whole series on sensory processing. But the book was written for my parents who were being pulled in all these different directions of what do I do? Do I just do ABA? Do I just do sensory integration? It was just a very easy way to understand how sensory processing helps the body integrate information. So the sensory functions are our keyboard that we're creating words with. But if we're typing on a keyboard nonsense is going to show up on the screen.
Very,
So
very interesting. And where can the listeners today get your book? If an occupational therapist or parent is listening, where can they get this book?
that's a great question because I have been terrible about keeping it published. It's usually on Amazon. I do have copies and I will make sure that it's available. I do have a website, Sensory Integration Simplified. Again, my focus has not been there, so I'll make sure it's available. If anyone wants it and they reach out, we will have it available.
I think it's a wonderful resource, and the people listening can really reach out and get a copy of your book, because to learn from
Absolutely.
somebody with your years of experience, and to read the book, I saw the book and I definitely want a copy. So I think it's
Got
very
it.
cool. Now, how did you land up you were telling us how you landed up actually in the ABA space. So let me start by asking you, what is ABA? Because there are so many myths and misconceptions about ABA. People don't understand what ABA is. I want to actually tell you something very interesting. In Afrikaans, ABA is toegepaste gedragsanalyse.
Okay.
Actual definition in Afrikaans, I did an interview for an Afrikaans radio station for April, which is World Autism Awareness Month, and I actually had to go brush up on my Afrikaans to get this right. But interestingly, in Afrikaans, it's called toegepaste gedragsanalyse. I was spitting my teeth out trying to remember, how you say ABA in Afrikaans, because sometimes they also just say ABBA. But yeah, it's just interesting to know that that's what they call it here in South Africa, in Afrikaans. Very fancy name. But I think let's just start with explaining to everyone today, what is ABA?
Absolutely. So ABA is a social psychological science. Applied behavior analysis came from, we all know Skinner and Pavlov, who did the meat powder. We all learned that in school. And it has been the development of a social science that basically uses a formula and measures the child against themselves. So ABA is the practical application of these theories that were developed way back in the 1960s, even earlier. And it's evolved into the social science. And what makes ABA different to other psychological and technological, I should say, science is that it has to be socially significant. So we're applying this formula to a functional client, and it's not just in the autism world. ABA spreads right across to the business world as well. But what defines it from these other psychological, it is from the field of psychology, is that it has to be socially significant. And it is a treatment tool that uses the easiest way to explain it is ABC, an antecedent, what happened before the behavior, what behavior are we observing, and what is the consequence of the behavior. And I think what makes it challenging to understand is it's almost so simple that you go, no, it can't be that, it can't be that simple. And the terminology and the theories behind it have created their own language. So when we read something in ABA, you look at the language and you go, that doesn't jive with me. I come from this academic world, and that doesn't make sense to me. And so that's why I dived into the ABA of what are we trying to achieve here, and what does it really mean? I don't know if that gives you enough information.
It does, and I'm going to unravel ABA a little bit more with you. That gives a very good explanation of what applied behavior analysis is. And if I can just spend a little bit of time clearing up some of the misconceptions, because
Yes.
Dr. Margot in South Africa, occupational therapists will tell parents, and I hear this often from the parents, ABA is torture treatment. Let me ask you this question. Is ABA torture treatment? And why do you think ABA has got this reputation of being torture treatment? And
Okay.
how do you explain that? People think it's torture treatment.
It's so that is a reality. Whether we're insulting people or not, that is the reality of the perception of ABA. We still have it here in the US, even though it is one of the fastest growing treatments and the gold standard for treatment for autism in the US. So let's take a step back to my previous ABA career. I was that OT.
Interrupt you there,
Yep.
just don't lose your train of thought. But you said it's the gold standard of intervention in the USA, and maybe you can just fold that, the reason that it's a gold standard, into your answer as well, because I just want to say that again, it's the gold standard of treatment. But in South Africa, literally, you know, it's torture treatment, it's robotic, don't dare
dog training.
Dog training. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I was that OT. Parents would come to me and I'd go, oh my God, you're doing dog training, and then go, oh, I shouldn't, you know. So that was my soapbox. So I understand that and I resonate with that. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about teaching people and exposing the truth. So the first question is, you had asked is, well, let's look at why they say it's the gold standard. They use it as the gold standard because the beauty of ABA is the science behind it is we're always measuring the child against themselves. It's called single study design. And you know this from the training too. So we're only looking at what we see when the child, and I'm just going to speak about this as a child. It's not politically correct to do that today in the US, but for purposes of our conversation, let's assume we're only working with a child. So when you're looking at the child, all we're doing is we're documenting what we're seeing. So if I am observing a child and they're doing this, we all know that's self-stimulation. An OT would go, oh, they've got sensory processing issues, they've got visual perception issues. My theory was always that this creates a space for them that they can see, because kids with autism have stronger peripheral vision than cortical vision. We could go into all of that. What an ABA therapist does is they observe that the child is using self-stimulation. That's it. We're not asking why. We're not looking into the neurology behind it. We're just observing. Where that translates into difficulty understanding, in my opinion, is the humanness of what we know. In other words, what I mean by that is You've got all these ABA therapists who are being trained. I don't love the training that goes on in ABA. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I can tell you in the state of Georgia, we have some of the worst ABA I've ever seen in my life. And we're known, Georgia is known as being not a great state to observe. And unfortunately, that translation, when I'm looking at it as an occupational therapist and I'm watching this child who's being stuck in a chair and doing what we call DTT, which is discrete trial training, which looks like dog training, that's where we start to get upset because we can see this child needs movement and they need to play and they need natural environment training. So what's happened is ABA was put in this tiny little box because that's what people knew to do. And because it was growing as fast as it was growing, the training and the education was not keeping up with that. So I think what we see components of ABA that are being pulled out that a therapist or a technician is comfortable with. And it's like everything, right? The theory is there to support it, but the theory is only as good as the person who's training the next person underneath them and the next person underneath them. So really good ABA is absolutely beautiful to watch because we do have these components that give us a roadmap. It is the only evidence-based practice out there that truly gives us a recipe of what to do, which was my biggest frustration in OT when I was building these treatment plans is I couldn't get the recipe. So when I was training all these therapists and they'd go, but how do I know what to do next? That would become my challenge. Well, intuitively, can't you see what you need to do next? The child's exhibiting this, 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 and this. And the therapists, the OTs and speech therapists would look at me and go, but how do you know? What ABA does is provides you with those answers of this is how you know. This is the behavior I observed. I'm taking all my belief systems that I have created in my head and I'm putting them aside because I have to follow this formula. So coming back to why OTs and speech therapists feel like this is the antithesis of what they're trying to do is sometimes it is. Sometimes we see really, just like sometimes we see not so great OT and not so great speech. Our intentions are good. Anyone who goes into this field, we want to help people. So it's not the intentions of the person. I can look at it and I can say, I can use the same ABA formula when I'm measuring OT and speech treatment too and say, what am I seeing before the behavior? What behavior am I seeing from this OT or speech therapist? Oh, I'm seeing that they lack certain tools that they need, or oh my gosh, they have amazing tools that they're using. That's the behavior I'm seeing. And the consequence is a great outcome for the child. So the beauty of ABA is it gives you the recipe, but you can manipulate the environment. You can understand the function of the behavior. And I think this was a key turning point for me once I understood that you could actually identify the function of a behavior. And there are only 4 functions. There are 4 functions. I'm either going to escape, I'm going to run away from something because I don't want to do it, I'm afraid, whatever the reason is, doesn't matter. Access to attention. I want mommy's attention. We see it all the time. A child will cry in front of mommy, but not in front of daddy. Well, why are we doing that? Access to attention. Automatic function. Automatic function is sensory functioning. Why is the child self-stimulating? I don't know. I don't know what's going on in that brain. I mean, neurologically, I can hypothesize as an OT because I know what goes on in the brain neurologically. So what have I got? I've said I'm missing the 4th one.
I'm missing the access to a tangible. So it's escape, maintain
Tangible. Right. I want that.
And
Yeah.
then access.
So imagine, if we could take those 4 functions of behavior as an OT, I'm now empowered to go, oh, that's why the child's acting up. There are only 4 hypotheses. There are 4 potential reasons why it's happening. We don't have that in the OT world. So that was my very long explanation
very long explanation is so valued and so appreciated today, and such a necessary conversation to have. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to be talking to you about this. I think you are extremely unique. It's very rare to find someone who has their doctorate who then went on to, pursue a board certified behavior analyst degree. So I think coming from you, everyone is listening and sitting up and paying attention, and you really explained it so nicely. Often for the parents listening, just from my experience, they'll hear their child crying, and it's so hard for a parent to hear their child crying. The little 3-year-old, the little 2-year-old, or the 4-year-old crying in the ABA session. And I also sometimes think ABA gets a bad name because the kids are screaming. But then what I try to explain to the parents is that they're crying because they can't speak and they don't have a way to vocally express, leave me alone, I can't do this, I don't want to do this. They're used to things being on their terms. And now we've come into this space and we're trying to teach them the developmental skills that they're missing, because the long-term goal is their functionality. We need the eye contact, the imitation skills, the object discrimination, to teach language, all those early skills in a young developing child. And now we're coming into their space and we're placing demands. And so they protested. But for a parent listening to this, or for maybe an occupational therapist who sits in on an ABA session, they just hear the child screaming. And so human nature is that the minute you hear a young child screaming, you think they're sore, they're uncomfortable, they're in distress. And I always explain to people, the crying is simply their protesting, their way of communication. They don't have another way to say, I don't want to do this now, please leave me alone. And it's very hard for the parents, because the crying and screaming of the little baby, you just want to rush over to your child and hug your child.
And hug them. Yeah. So you want to give them that access, because that's what they're asking for. And a good ABA session, and I know you've seen this because I know how successful your school is the incredible, the joy and the relief when that child suddenly connects to, if you're using a PEC system or a picture exchange system, that they have the ability to choose where they want to go, and then that starts to build language. So you're right, crying. I mean, in my SI sessions, I would push the kids, because my goal was to make that neurological breakthrough. And now, do you get crying where the therapist is completely missing what the child is saying? Sure, we're going to have therapists who are not great therapists. But things like crying, screaming, tantrums, that is that child's communication. And it is our responsibility in the ABA world to redefine that pathway for the child and give them opportunities to learn socially appropriate ways of doing it. We have to start somewhere. So if the baseline is crying and screaming, that's the baseline that we collect data on. And what I would add is, when you're looking at a treatment plan, there are two things we're looking at. We're looking at skill acquisition. How am I going to learn these developmentally appropriate skills? And we're looking at behavior reduction. And a lot of the time we have to start with a behavior reduction, because that's all that child has used in connecting those functions of behavior in order to get to the skill acquisition. Yeah.
That's a very good way of explaining it. And there's so much to talk about. And I'm really enjoying the conversation with the ABA as well. It is data driven. So when we're working with the kids, we are scoring. Did we prompt them? Are we fading the prompts? And applied behavior analysis, simply, I always explain to say, provides teaching strategy. If I'm going to teach them to wash their hands, am I going to do so forward chaining or backward chaining? Where am I going to? So it simply gives you teaching procedures, and it is based on positive reward. So the first thing I always ask parents when they consult with me to decide if they want to commence on ABA on an ABA program is I'll say, what does your child love? Not what does your child like? Whether it's Peppa Pig or Paw Patrol, what does your child love? Because we're going to use what they love to teach them the developmental skills that they're missing. And what you
Correct.
said, it's about identifying developmental skill deficit, customizing lesson programs to teach developmental skill acquisition, and that's how you're reducing the challenging behaviors. So, for example, if they have anxiety, then we need to see, well, what could we be teaching? Emotional coping, right? How can we teach emotional coping? ABA may give clues there. If they're not talking, if they, they're spitting, they're kicking, they're biting to communicate. Where are we going with this? They're 2 and 3 years old now. Have you seen I'm sure you have seen a 10-year-old hitting, biting, screaming. So now, we advising parents against the ABA. And also, Shelley, maybe we can talk about that early intervention and how that's an important
critical.
And the OTs also don't do ABA. And as you explained, you can get bad OT therapy and you can get bad ABA. So there are programs for ABA that aren't good quality, but that doesn't make the whole profession of ABA bad. They're good OTs and they're bad OTs. That doesn't make the whole profession of occupational therapy a treatment that shouldn't be considered for a child.
Exactly.
So I'm so happy that you raised that. But talk to us more about early intervention, and then also something that I think you can tell us is about identifying the red flags to autism. Why is it so important to pick that up in a young developing child and the early intervention part?
Absolutely, because this is critical. We know how the brain develops now. We've got enough information and enough studies to know how the brain develops. And the facts are the first 7 years of a child's development are critical for their motor, social, communication, and emotional development. And interestingly enough, we're going to see, this is another podcast for another day. I'm very interested to see what our babies born in 2020 during COVID, during the world shutdown, we're seeing major anxiety, motor deficits, visual perceptual deficits. But as I say, that's for another day. But that just shows us the impact of social social boundaries that can affect development. So the CDC, which is the big voice in the US, which happens to be here in Georgia, and the Marcus Autism Center, where I was on their development team many, many, many years ago. The studies show that we can make neurological change. We actually can see the connections in the brain early on. And if we can facilitate that neurological development within the first 3 years of life, we have a different child by age 10. And that's why I'm a big proponent of intensive therapy. And it's one of the things that's beautiful about ABA. In the States, they will pay for 40 hours worth of therapy. So that child is with someone.
You've got to pause. I want to say that again. In the States, they'll pay for 40 hours of ABA. For the people listening today, do you understand that means 7 hours a day? I'm going to say that again. 7 hours of ABA for the child, Monday to Friday.
And weekends. We've got therapists who'll go, our clinics, ours is a clinic-based program. We don't do in-home anymore. We go into the rural areas. But that being said, diagnosis, and I can find the study for you. There's a very, very large study that actually showed that for every year that a child is not diagnosed, they lose 20 to 30 points on an IQ test. So think about that, right?
Wow, that's so interesting.
A normal IQ today is 105 to, we're seeing kids in the high range. If you've got a child who's not receiving services, intensive services, for every year that they don't get diagnosed, by the time they're 5 years old and going into I've got to think in South African terms now. It would be
Grade one,
kindergarten,
grade one,
grade one.
grade R.
They are so far behind developmentally, and now they're being stuck in a classroom with 20, 30 other kids, and they've got to learn reading, writing, how to write their name. They're still figuring out how to navigate their environments. So early diagnosis is no longer an option. It's not an option. It's an absolute. When we have got kids coming into our clinics at 2 years old, and we can talk about stories that we've seen where we've got nonverbal kids coming in. So at 3, because at 2, we're not expecting high levels of verbal behavior. Oh yeah, I'm sounding like a real ABA therapist now. But at 3 years old, and within 6 months, they have gained so much language that if we had to retest them, you can't really test IQ at age 3, 4. But if we had to test them on developmental scales and levels, they have gained years worth of development. That's what a good ABA program, a good intensive program. We used to do that with OT and speech in our intensive programs, but we didn't have the behavioral component. So you asked, how do you identify? What are the signs that you look for? Everybody thinks that autism is, it is a neurological disorder, but it is essentially, I think the way that I like to look at it, it's essentially a communication disorder. So to me, when you're looking at a child with potential red flags, are they living in their own little world? Are they controlling their world within their family? So, they may not want to get dressed in the morning. So the whole family schedule revolves around how they're going to get that child dressed. Or maybe they don't want to eat a bunch of stuff. So they're defensive. They're tactile defensive. So this is where it gets really interesting on both sides. And this is where we have great opportunity to make changes. The sensory integration therapist in me goes, oh, well, that child's got sensory processing issues. And if we work on the sensory processing issues, we'll resolve those neurological issues and they will be able to function in the environment. The ABA therapist in me goes, I'm observing these red flags. So what are red flags? Eye contact, of course, is your first red flag. Now, it's not your first goal. Drives me crazy when I see goals on therapists across the board, OT, PT, speech, ABA, doctors who say eye contact needs to be a goal. Another podcast, but eye contact will come when that child is safe in their environment. And again, safety, I talk about safety in my book. So if you look at the child and they don't look like they feel comfortable in their skin, eye contact, of course, language. You've experienced this yourself. You may have seen a child who is developing language and then they lose their language and they start gesturing and things just look off. But I think the biggest thing, now we've got such a diverse spectrum of diagnoses. And yet we took all these diagnoses and we lumped them into ASD, autism spectrum disorder. But for me, the biggest red flags are the communication red flags. And so how did we distinguish? And again, I get asked this a lot. How do I know if my child's got sensory processing issues or my child's got autism? And, at some point, does it matter? I mean, yes, it does. As a parent, there's still that guilt and that, oh my God, my child's got autism. What kind of life are they going to lead? And again, you've experienced this. I can tell you, we've had kids who are nonverbal who came to us, oh God, 20 years ago. I've got one of my kids who was in the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. He's now married. And this was a child that couldn't tolerate. That's another red flag. If you have to go to the grocery store or the park and your child seems to be struggling, covering their ears, screaming at noises. So we could divide it into, there's the sensory pieces. Then there's the motor pieces. They just seem to be behind their peers. But the biggest thing with autism, it is a social communication disorder that sits on top. That is your biggest red flag. I hope that answered.
It does. It absolutely does. And I think when it comes to treatment as well, that speech motor planning part is also like really important, because you
Yes.
get the kids with the apraxia. My oldest son, David, who's 22, he's profoundly autistic, and he had a very, very severe speech motor planning challenge.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's so uplifting to hear you talking about kids who were nonverbal and gained speech. And it's all about the functionality and independence, because ultimately that's going to dictate their quality of life. And if they have
Yes.
a good quality of life, then the family can have a good quality of life. A lot of people will say, just leave them, accept them for who they are. And as
Why?
a parent, raising a child, any child, you want them to be able to have independence and communicate with you and have those functional skills. They do live in this world, and we do need to empower them with a way to communicate. I don't know how any parent can simply just sit back and say, well, okay, fine, they just neurodiverse, I just accept. No one's saying don't accept that they have this condition, but surely as parents, we're entitled to want them to have a good life and to want them to learn and function and have a way to express themselves. And my oldest son, David, it's been a 20-year battle. I've turned the world upside down. I've screamed at the universe. You know, we've turned the world upside down to ensure his functionality. And people also say 7 hours a day of ABA. How's my 2 or 3-year-old going to cope in a 7 hours a day? So maybe that's just also something that you can explain, because generally in South Africa, occupational therapy, speech therapy, they'll do 2.5 hours a week, or, you know, maximum 3 45-minute sessions. Are we going to take that risk at 4 now when they're non-verbal? We're having speech and OT like twice a week. It's kind of glaring that they need more intervention. Even a 2-year-old, you were talking about how we test development and how we need to consider the brain plasticity and to help them at an early age learn the skills that they're missing. But Shelley, the people listening today, they're going, this Dr. Margot, how do you expect a 2 or 3-year-old to be in 7 hours a day of ABA? You explain that, because the OTs are thinking 2 45 minutes a week.
Okay. So, this is, boy, how much time do we have? So even as an OT, we can look at it. I can sit here and I can spout that the research shows, and the research has shown since the 1940s. Jean Ayres, who was the pioneer of sensory integration, kids came to her clinics for 5 6 hours a day. And that's how I treat it. I would, and it doesn't mean you're not slowing down in that 6 7 hours. It doesn't mean that if the child needs a nap, they're not going to get a nap. All that it means is we're structuring every 5 minutes, 15 minutes, hour of that child's day to ensure that they have got access and opportunity to learn. So the options we have are, if your child is typically developing as a 2-year-old, they're going to go through all these little things. They're going to go into the kitchen cupboard and they're going to pull out all the pots and pans, and they're going to go to the park, and your day is structured. It's no different with ABA or an intensive program. You're still structuring that day. You may be doing it slowly, but you're intervening with your formula, where you're creating a successful environment for them to be successful, so you can facilitate communication and learning every 5 minutes of their day. I never, never, ever, ever did 45 minutes twice a week. That is like you telling me, okay, you want to lose 20 kilos, go to the gym for 30 minutes twice a week. Don't change your diet. Don't exercise anymore. Don't get any good sleep, and you're going to lose your 20 kilos. No, you're not. The body doesn't work like that. Brain function and neurological function has to be continuously receiving input and providing output at the level that is appropriate for you in order to make a neurological change. Now, one day, maybe one of the things that I didn't put on my introduction is I started using QEEG, mini EEG machines where you put the head on, and you actually measure in real time what the brain is doing. And the
Wow.
brain is, yeah, it's very cool. And I used that as a baseline to see what my changes were neurologically. So I would bring a child in. If they could tolerate it, we'd do a QEEG as our baseline diagnostic. Then every week, so they would come for a month worth of intensive therapy. And then every week we would compare the QEEG, and we could see significant changes. I'm talking like 60, but on average, we had 45 to 65% changes within a month. And so intensive therapy is proven. Um, why are OTs doing 45 minutes twice a week? Because that's what parents can afford. So if that's all we can afford, and again, that's the challenge with this, is it's not just, oh, my child needs services. It's like, how am I going to leverage my financial? If you don't have the money to do that, how do you provide that service with your child? So one day maybe we'll make enough that we can just provide it for all the kids who need it, regardless of the stakeholders and the finances involved. But intensity it's been proven, it's critical. As I say, we've got many 2-year-olds. The earlier we can start an intensive program, the sooner we can get our kids out. So think about this like that. Oh, this is another study that I haven't spoken about in many years. For the earlier you start therapy, now I have to think that I'm not spewing nonsense here, and I'll find that study too, because that was part of my thesis was on dyspraxia.
Ah,
But for every 6 months of intensive therapy, you can gain a year's worth of development. I have to go back and look at it. So think about it this way. If we can get a 2-year-old into therapy for 2 years, so from 2 to 4, the likelihood of them being able to socialize with their peers in a natural environment is that much higher than if we spread it out and suddenly at 7 years old we go, oops, we need to do intensive therapy now. Now we have those kids because many doctors still today in the US too, we're doing a lot of education, are saying, oh, they'll grow out of it. They don't grow out of it. We don't grow out of it. If we have anxiety, we have strategies that we use. And a lot of people medicate, and medication is necessary at certain points. That's another whole podcast. But let's use the intensity first. Wouldn't you rather just do 2 years worth of therapy and then live a fairly typical life? I don't want to say normal because nothing's normal in life. So, yeah, we know the intensity early on is going to facilitate higher levels of learning and make life easier moving forward.
The intervention that you're talking about is so life-changing. I want to share the story of my younger son. People who know me know that I have 3 boys. My oldest is 22. His name is David, and he's profoundly autistic. I was pregnant with my second, Ellie, when the first was diagnosed with autism. My second had normal development, and he's studying at the University of Cape Town. And he's in 3rd year actually medicine. He wants to be a doctor. He wants to treat children with autism. Growing up with a brother who had autism, and top of the list at the kitchen table was what we're going to do for David. How are we going to make him feel better? How are we going to make him function more? It can be extremely debilitating to a family when a child can't express themselves and has to inappropriate behavior.
And the siblings take a huge toll.
huge toll. And there's too much to talk about, Shelley, because also just when you were talking, it was also reminding me just to say that the spectrum of autism is so broad. It really requires a redefinition. We're comparing apples and oranges when we compare lower functioning to higher functioning. And there's a group that say, accept me for who I am. Absolutely, we recognize you, we see you.
That's your choice.
It's your choice. If you want acceptance into the community, absolutely, you should have that. But often the adults who have a diagnosis of autism, it's a completely different kind of autism to the young kids who are fighting for their communication and their development, and to the teenagers who get kicked out of school and are depressed and have OCD and oppositional defiance, and just, it's not pretty. It's not a superpower. And for the people listening today, we really do need to respect the different kinds of autism across the spectrum. If you've seen one individual, you've seen one individual.
Right, that's it.
Now, a lot of people say ABA is bad because you need to just accept the child has autism. They were born like this. They see the world differently. As a parent, I say, I'm always going to accept my child, but I want to give my child an opportunity to learn so that they can live in this world and that they can function. And when I'm not there one day, they're going to have the most skills that's possible so that they can lead a good quality of life. Because as parent, I always joke, Shelley, I say, like, I'm not even allowed to die. My oldest son, David, he wouldn't understand. Where did I go?
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue.
So how can we just sit back and, like, a young child with autism, they can smear their feces on the wall. They have no means to communicate. They're screaming. They're hitting themselves. How can we accept something like that? No parent can accept something like that. We want them to learn to function and communicate. But I don't think any parent, you can't tell any parent to give up on their child and not to try and help them, to have basic human functioning. Now, that brings me to my story. When my oldest was 10, I was extremely brave, and we decided to have a third child. I'm not brave anymore. I now suffer from post-traumatic stress. These kids put me in the boxing ring. And my youngest son, at 17 months, developed all the red flags to autism in a week in front of our eyes. I had done a lot of research. I thought I could control the environment. I knew about how autism triggered. I was going to control this. And my fate was a little bit different there. Autism came knocking on my door a second time. Now, boxing gloves on, and my youngest son started applied behavior analysis 7 hours a day at the age of 17 months. People find this extremely hard to understand, very hard to conceptualize. What I want to explain is, and to add to what you were saying, if the child is not learning from their natural environment, it's just about putting someone with that child for the hours in a day to give them information, because when there's an interruption in their development and in their sensory processing, etc., they're not learning from their natural environment to their optimum. So having that ABA trained person with them is giving them an opportunity to hear the information more times than a child who's actually learning from their typical environment, from their natural environment. So with ABA, as you know, the kids learn because of repetition. They heard the word 20 more times than
they heard it, they saw it, they saw a color. It's presenting the tools to them consistently in a very logical, broken down manner. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Please jump in. And with my younger son, Aaron, he loved his ABA program. How did you do 7 hours a day at 17 months? Well, my staff would start working with him at 7 a.m. in the morning. They'd work for a few hours. He'd go to sleep. He'd have something to eat. He'd wake up. And they played with him at 17 months. It was very much NET, natural environment training, following his lead, until we got him to engage. And my husband always says, Aaron was so happy in his ABA program. If you have to ask him now, do you remember when all those girls came to play with you? He has very fond memories of 7 hours of a day of ABA.
Of attention.
No, of attention. So I think what people don't understand is it's not a robotic program where you're putting them at a table and drilling them. Sometimes
Yes.
you're giving them information, and sometimes you're expecting a response, but then you're rewarding them immediately. So they're coming in and out of attention. It's not about 7 hours a day. I'm expecting a response, and very much you're going to achieve results in an ABA program if the child is being motivated. It's operant conditioning based on positive reinforcement. You know, Shelley, people will say, Ilana, how can you guys do ABA? It's punishment procedures. You need to accept your child. And people find it so hard to believe that Aaron had the best outcome. He's 13 years old. He's in a mainstream school. He made a 360 turnaround. He has friends. He's in a mainstream school with no support. He scored average on his IQ. We were so excited for his average on his IQ. Okay. He at 5, he was re-diagnosed, having lost his diagnosis. Now, the re-diagnosis was, well, yes, the educational psychologist assessments didn't pick up any symptoms. Yes, the class teacher's report. Aaron is thriving in all areas of his life, socially, at school, and he doesn't need support. Now, Shelley, when we started, he had apraxia. I had a very, very highly trained speech therapist from New York, trained specifically in speech motor planning, who I flew to South Africa to help, touch the muscles of the face, to help address the speech motor planning. And when she saw him, she said, Ilana, he has a severe sensory disorder. He has apraxia, severe apraxia. And, because we were integrating her targets into the ABA program on a day-to-day. And I also actually, and I hope she's listening, my cousin, one of my very close friends and cousin, is an occupational therapist, and she also had a hand in my young son Aaron's program, and she made a sensory diet for him, and we folded that into his ABA program over the years. And so there really is a place for all of this to come together so well. And people will say, he wasn't autistic to start. But in my book, Saving My Sons, A Journey with Autism, the therapist that worked with him documented his apraxia, documented how he wasn't able to do object discrimination, how he didn't follow receptive instructions, how he ran around in circles, how they couldn't get him to say a single consonant or vowel. And this boy is having his 13th birthday, and he's actually having his bar mitzvah this month.
Mazel tov. That's amazing.
And we couldn't be more proud. And we got him back, and we got to hear his voice, and he's one of those cases that came right. And, I get so much criticism for sharing my experience. People are more caught up with the diagnosis and get so upset about the fact that a child can actually have such a good result. But look at it, it was very early intervention. My oldest son, David, we didn't start at 17 months. I also must add that we did ensure a good diet. It was gluten, dairy-free. There were some medical interventions that we did to support his immune system, etc. And then you have my oldest son, David, and he did not make a 360 turnaround. And he is profoundly autistic. In fact, a couple of years ago, the CDC recognized profound autism as part of the autism diagnosis and separated that category, which I think is a very important landmark, because it said, listen here, we acknowledge that there is this group of individuals and adults who have profound autism, which means the parent is a caregiver. A lot of them
for the rest of their life.
Yeah, and you'll tell us about them in America. They land up in an institution. They can't live at home. In South Africa, we don't have institutions for them. But my son David, who's 22 with epilepsy and profound autism, because he did ABA for, get this, it'll be very interesting for you, 20 years. 20 years. And because of that ABA, he he communicates mostly with an augmentative device. And we taught him to work in a kitchen. And because of ABA, and he can follow a recipe and he can make cupcakes and pizza, and we feed homeless people. And he loves working in the kitchen. And he's functional in so many ways with independence to brush his teeth and get dressed in
That's
the morning.
incredible.
And he can bath himself, and he's profoundly autistic, and over the years when inappropriate behaviors would pop their head in, the
Oh, yeah.
ABA team would get together and brainstorm and help us put out those fires that would often be debilitating to my family. I'll often hear the OT and speech therapist say, we can't deal with the child's behavior. Well, collaborate with us, work with us. Yeah,
That's right.
we are the experts in behavior management. We want to work with you. I
Yep.
invite any occupational therapist listening today to make contact with you, come and see the Star Academy, come and sit in on the sessions. Don't adopt somebody else's opinion. Come and see for yourself.
And this, yeah, I think, when I take a step back and I look at all of this, and it was one of the things when we were looking at preparing for today, I think this is a good lead in, and I know you haven't asked the question yet, but I'm kind of going to go there. Um, where do the two or the three professions, OT speech and ABA, how do they connect? And I think the first part is understanding the ABA language, because ABA did create what has separated us all is ABA created its own language. That when you understand what the various terms mean, you go, oh, so automatic function is sensory processing. It's not sensory integration treatment. And that's where I think there's a lot of crossover. But if I had to separate and we had to put it in a spreadsheet and go, okay, who brings what to the table? OT brings the neurological understanding and development to the table. Speech brings the oral motor, the communication, the social. I don't want to put social. It leads to the social piece, but it actually is the motor, connecting the motor and language piece of speaking. And what ABA brings to the table is managing the behavior, the environment, and the people, the social interactions around that. So it is the perfect recipe when you're looking at, doesn't matter the intensity of the diagnosis. I agree with you. It drives me nuts when people get stuck on the freaking diagnosis. Oh, well, he has autism, so that gives you an excuse to behave the way you're behaving. I don't think so. Every parent knew when they came and worked with me that, I'm sorry, that behavior is not acceptable here in your home, in the grocery store, at a birthday party. That is not socially acceptable behavior. I don't care what diagnosis you have. And I worked with some of we had a kid that we used to have to open the car door and throw him into the car, close the car door, and mom would have to drive. Or we could swap stories that people would go, oh, you're exaggerating, and we're not exaggerating. We're not even telling half the story. So it provides the perfect to get these three, and I had physical therapy as well. That's kind of on the fringe because it gets more challenging because the PTs are just not trained the way I would like to see them trained it's more mechanical. And sometimes we just don't need mechanical. It has its place, but I wouldn't say it's a priority. Um, but that team of people, if we could collaborate effectively, and we're seeing it in the States, it's not easy. And in fact, we just came back from an ABA conference. It was actually an investors conference of what does the future of ABA look like. And the insurance companies in this country are now calling for integrated treatment. It's tough because they won't pay for it at the same time. In order to have one of the things I did do is I actually Boston had a certification in interprofessional development and how do you build an interprofessional team. So I do have that certificate too. And it was very interesting understanding the dynamics of how to get people to talk together. But yes, I think it's critical and I think it's where we're going. Um, and I think that, kudos to you for what you've done because you did push a rock up a mountain. It wasn't a little hill, and you continue to do that. And one of the things that I love about your blogs and your responses and is that you do question the status quo and you're not afraid to say, hang on a second. We had the discussion about neurodivergent. We all have a choice. If your choice is that as a parent that you don't want to facilitate, I don't want to say it like that because it's not a judgment. I think that the choice you make is dependent on the information that you've got. And if you've got a wealth of information and you can make the right decision for your family, then make the right decision for your family. And if that choice is to accept your child and love your child for who they are, and it's not impacting the family, kudos to you. I admire that. On the flip side, if you we don't hold our kids back from school because we don't like the school they're going to, or we didn't like the teacher or the principal. You tell your kid, you figure it out. That's life. Why wouldn't we do the same thing for our kids when we know they have the capacity to learn, regardless of what the diagnosis is? I work with horses as well. I had a big hippotherapy program. And I just did a clinic with horses this past weekend and it was all about communicating with the horse. If we can communicate with an animal that doesn't have cognitive ability, why wouldn't we give our kids that opportunity too? Like it doesn't make sense in my head. I can't wrap my head around that. Divorce rate in the States is 84% in families with kids with special needs.
84%. That's very high. Very, very
Yeah,
high.
84%.
And as you're saying, also just to add to what you said, I love what you've said, and just to add to what you've said is your experience doesn't cancel my experience. And the spectrum is very, very broad. One experience on the spectrum doesn't cancel another experience, and we have to be very mindful of the different experiences on the spectrum. And you put it so beautifully, it's a choice. But everyone is entitled to make their choice, and it's a choice that really is to be respected. And people will make different choices.
And there's a technology, we're evolving. If we get stuck where we are today, we wouldn't have the technology we have. We wouldn't have the iPhones and people who pioneer technology, and I talk about technology in terms of therapy as well. We're not going to go anywhere. We're going to stay stagnant. So
yes, because AI is changing the world, right?
AI is changing the world. Technology is moving at such a rate that as humans, we can't keep up with it anymore. So again,
I know, Shelly, that you're doing work in that area and that in the coming months, you're going to be launching something very interesting around all of this. And hopefully we'll have a part 2 to the podcast so you can share with everybody about your invention. But AI has definitely changed the world and we've got to keep up. We've got to think about this and how we're going to keep up with technology.
Our populations with autism they're drawn to this technology because it removes that social connection. And what a lot of people don't realize too is they'll go, oh, my child just doesn't need social connection. Rubbish. Our kids with autism are desperate for a social connection. And ABA is a very good tool to create that social connection. And I'm trained in floor time and all the other pieces, which are great tools. But ABA again provides the recipe for that. And that's why I've become a big proponent of going, hey, we both have a place here.
It's been wonderful to speak to you and to learn from you. And I'm just in awe and have so much admiration. Leave us with a message of inspiration.
So I had to write this down so that but this is what I think. I can see, wait, hang on. Let me go down there to
Are you
okay.
finding your message of inspiration?
My message of inspiration.
My message of inspiration is always when life gives you lemons, make orange juice and leave the world wondering how you did that.
I love that. It is so true. Our generation, we grew up in the most segregated country in the world. It was law. And we watched this become the Rainbow Nation. So we watched leaders back then fight against change and social dynamics, which now became the norm. So, of all the countries in the world, we should be the first one to look at crisis and go one step at a time, one child at a time, one family at a time, because change is inevitable. And either you step into it bravely or you watch it bypass you. It will happen whether you agree with it or not. So we have a responsibility to our children. So step out of the way or jump on the wagon, and it's blaze a new trail.
I love that. Dr. Margot, it's just been beyond words to speak to you today. Thank you for sharing your valuable insight, your knowledge, and I look forward to part two. Thank you so much.
I love it. Thank you for the opportunity, and let's go and blaze a new trail.
Lovely. Chat to you soon.
Bye.